bring up Laura Rainsborough, who is the Ottawa Riverkeeper. Laura has worked in gardens, galleries, and along riverbanks to deliver positive environmental and social change. She holds a magisteriate in environmental studies from York University, specialized in environmental education and community arts. At age 25, she founded Toronto's Not Far From the Tree, an award-winning charitable initiative to pick fruit growing in backyards and transform it into a shared public good. Later, at the helm of Food for All New Brunswick, she built a robust network to activate and amplify food security. She's a TEDx speaker, a recipient of the Vital People Award, the Woman of the Earth Award, the Junie of the Year, no, I'm just kidding, and the Gaia Environmental Award, and she was named an Agent of Change by the Center of Social Justice. So Laura brings some significant experience and passion to the role of Riverkeeper. She lives in Ottawa, along the river in Orleans, originally from New Brunswick, as you might have gotten a bit of a flavor of her education and whatnot, Sackville. And she grew up very connected to water, canoeing in a lake in her backyard, swimming on beaches in Northumberland Strait, and mudslinging on the Bay of Fundy mud flats. She speaks 4 languages and loves to cross-country ski. Laura, our Ottawa Riverkeeper and CEO since 2021. Thanks for joining us, and please come on up, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for the introduction. Thank you to the Nepean Sailing Club for inviting me to speak this evening. It is such a pleasure to chat with you tonight about this topic, caring for the Ottawa River, because I know I'm not alone in this room for wanting to care for this river and loving this river and having such an interest. So it's really such a joy to be in such friendly company this evening. And the Nepean Sailing Club, as well as many of the other clubs listed earlier, have been really strong partners of Ottawa Riverkeeper, many going back to when the organization was founded in 2001. And so I'm really grateful for the partnerships that we have had and the great work that has come from that to protect the river. So before I go too much into my talk this evening, I want to show up as my whole self tonight. And what that means for me is that I'm here as the Riverkeeper and CEO with Ottawa Riverkeeper, but I'm also holding a lot of grief right now. My father passed away 2 weeks ago. Whew, I thought that might happen. Tear up a bit. And he was such an inspiration to me for connecting with nature. He and my mother chose to raise my sisters and I on a lake in a beautiful cedar home. And we had a gorgeous canoe where my father was the one who would take me out canoeing. And those are some of my best childhood memories, is being out on the lake with him. But he would use the lake year round. He would be out there skiing, skating, swimming. He would take our dog out in the lake and of course, canoeing. And so, and he was also a scientist. He was a chemistry professor. And so he had both a love of science, a love of teaching, and that connection with water in our own backyards. And, you know, I thought this was just like a quirky thing that he did when I was growing up, but I now realize just how important this was. That right out back of our property, and this was a beautiful lake with, you know, loons would kind of lull me to sleep at night in summer nights. And just out back of our property, there was part of the municipal sewage infrastructure. And on occasion, that infrastructure would overflow. So there would be untreated sewage going directly into the lake. And the only way that anybody could know that was happening, the only system in place, was that a little red light at the top of the sort of mechanism would turn on. And there would be no indication to municipal employees or elected officials that that light was even on. But my father would call and he would report it, and he would yak at them about how important it was, that they needed to do something about it. They needed to come down there, they needed to treat it, and they needed to do better. And so I'd actually sort of forgotten about that. Even after I'd accepted this role of becoming the Ottawa Riverkeeper. But now when I reflect back on that, and as I'm reflecting back on just how much of an impact he had on me, I'm realizing that he was the first water advocate that I knew. And so I'm showing, oh, sheesh. So I'm showing up with that grief tonight, but I'm also showing up with that inspiration that he brought to me, and that, I'm able to continue to live that through not only the life that I'm living, but the work that I'm doing. So, so I want to invite all of you to also think about somebody who has had an impact on you, who has helped you to realize that connection to nature, who has tuned you in to the cyclical rhythms of which not only surround us, but of which we are a part. And as hokey as this may sound, I invite you to kind of bring them into this room with you now so that they can be part of this conversation. Because we don't just show up as ourselves, we show up thanks to the community that has helped not only to raise us, but to support us. So I'm so impressed by the community that exists here at the Sailing Club, but also here tonight, showing up for this speaker series. I'm so impressed by this gorgeous building. This is my first time being inside. I'm, of course, so impressed by the river, right? Pretty amazing river. And so this is a beautiful, beautiful moment to come together, and I'm excited to speak with you this evening. I'm also showing up with a bit of another identity. I am a card-carrying member of the Nepean Sailing Club. I live in Orleans and I don't sail, so this is symbolic, purely symbolic, but it was a gift from the club and to recognize the partnership between the Nepean Sailing Club and Ottawa Riverkeeper. And so I want to acknowledge this evening and thank you for this as well, that I do think it is a shining symbol of the partnerships that we have. Not only, I guess I'm saying partnerships, I also mean the shared mission that we have to not only know this river and love this river, but also to protect it. So Ottawa Riverkeeper, just a couple years ago in 2023, moved into some new digs. We, as I said, have been around since 2001, but we had never had an office that even had a view to the river until 2023 when we moved into River House. And this is literally on the river. So this is the long-time home, it's 100 years old, of ONEC, the Ottawa New Edinburgh Club. And it is a gorgeous building. And Riverkeeper had long been looking for a place to have, with that view of the river, but also with that connection and opportunities to be public facing and to help mediate the relationship that we have with the river. And so just a couple years ago, we moved into River House. And this begins a new chapter for the organization with critical issues like climate change, biodiversity loss, and water protection, particularly freshwater protection. We know that there's so much more that needs to be done in this decade and in the coming years. And so Ottawa Riverkeeper has chosen to take this leap into a new space because of the opportunities that it brings about. And we couldn't be more excited. I'll share a bit tonight of what we've already been able to achieve by being in a new space, which offers us a new platform. But with that, of course, it comes with new costs to incur, and to ensure that we can do this exciting new work with the proper resources, we've also launched a major giving campaign. This is our first major fundraising campaign in the organization's history. It's called the Big River Give, Le Grand Don à la Rivière, and we're aiming to raise $5 million. We're 74% of the way there, and so progress is coming along. And so that's a whole new opportunity to power the next chapter of Ottawa Riverkeeper. And really that means that next chapter of being able to protect and steward the ecological health of this incredible, incredible river. So in a nutshell, our work is for a swimmable, drinkable, fishable Ottawa River watershed. And we use the word watershed because it's not just the main stem of the Ottawa, it's the Ottawa River, all of its tributaries, and you can't simply protect water because the way that a natural boundary of a watershed works is that all of the water flowing into it from that entire watershed is important to protect. So we take a watershed approach to protecting the Ottawa River and its tributaries. And we see that the importance of this work is for all species and for all generations. I'm the fourth in line of river keepers who have held this role. Lara Van Loon, Meredith Brown held the role for quite a while, 14, 15 years. And then Elizabeth Logue, and then I began in 2021. And so the naming tradition comes from being a member of the Global Waterkeeper Alliance, where the lead staff person holds the Waterkeeper title. And we've been a Waterkeeper Alliance member since our founding. This means that there are over 300 waterkeeper groups around the world sharing in the mission of swimmable, drinkable, fishable waters around the world. And each one has a waterkeeper who is standing up to protect their watershed. And if you think about that work globally, so this is a different kind of map than we would usually see. There are no political borders on here. But there are very real natural borders of watersheds. This is a global watershed map. And the Ottawa River watershed is nested within the world's largest freshwater ecosystem, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence watershed. And the Ottawa River is the largest tributary to the St. Lawrence. It is a powerful, powerful force. In fact, it can be known as the sixth Great Lake because its flow can exceed that of all of the Great Lakes combined. So we have a mighty Kitchissippi. But this work is not done alone. This work is done in concert with waterkeepers all around the world. And I have the privilege of being the Canadian representative on the Waterkeeper Council. And so I'm sitting at that table with waterkeepers from Senegal, from Nepal, from Australia, from Sweden, and London Waterkeeper, the Thames Riverkeeper, is on the council with me, and they just announced they're going to try to be a swimmable city, have the Thames be swimmable by 2035, I think they said. Wait till they find out about the Ottawa River and how swimmable it is. But so let's take it from the global and come to the local for where we really are right here, right now. The Ottawa River watershed, well, it's massive. I thought New Brunswick was big when I was living there. It's twice the size, more than twice the surface area of New Brunswick. The river itself is 1,271 kilometers long. And you can see sort of in the top left corner is a little zoom out to see it in relation to the rest of Canada. Now, it starts about 400 kilometers north of here at Lac des Outaouais, and it's around Lake Temiskaming that it curves south and then back east, flowing right past here and ending up towards Montreal. But it's almost exactly the same footprint, the watershed is, of Algonquin territory. And so it's important as we gather tonight to recognize that this land, but also these waters, are Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, and that the Anishinaabe Algonquin people have been the stewards and still are the stewards and rights holders to care for this land and water since time immemorial. Before I go on and tell more about our programming, I think it always becomes more relevant when we reflect on our personal connection. So I invite you to take a moment and think, what is your relationship with the Kitchissippi, with the Ottawa River, with La Rivière des Outaouais? I imagine many of you have very intimate relationships with the river, and that you may have had that relationship over a period of time when you've seen changes. You may have had relationships that also are with the other wildlife with which we share this river. And I'll also invite you to think about how there's another very intimate way in which you know the Ottawa River. The Ottawa is source drinking water for over 2 million people. Our tap water here is sourced from the Ottawa River. And when our bodies are about 60% water, that's a pretty intimate relationship, I would say. So, cheers. I'm told it's bad luck to cheers with water, but I don't think so. Also, if you're drinking beer, probably from Ottawa River water. So our work breaks down into science, education, and advocacy. Those are the 3 pillars through which I can easily explain our work. But often, I mean, some people think we're maybe a government agency. Some people think that maybe we test some water and talk about eels in the media. Some people have never heard of Ottawa Riverkeeper before. So I want to share with you some of our work, but also to describe some of the programs, how they work in practice. So we're a charity, as I said. We've existed since 2001, and our mission is to protect the ecological health of the river. And we do that first and foremost through science, through monitoring, because this is such a complex watershed that there is not a single entity that is looking out for trends and health of the Ottawa River. Maybe I'll just skip back to the map for a second. Not only does the river bisect Ontario and Quebec to become the provincial border, but there's also over 300 municipalities within the watershed. Plus, the river flows through federal land, even past our nation's capital with Parliament, and that means every MP drinks Ottawa River water too. And it's Algonquin territory. And so there's very complex jurisdictions to care for this watershed in a uniform way. But it also means that even just understanding the health of the river is complex. So our science work tries to fill that gap. What can we understand from the health of the river so that we can take informed action? So that we can know what it needs to be protected and that we can advocate for that. So through our science work, we do some of our own original research. Our science team goes out, for example, monitoring of benthic invertebrates. They actually go into stream beds. They have this method, it's called cabin, and they use kick nets, and they actually kick up the stream bed to see what are all the little critters that are living in there. Because the health or the type and quantity of species that are within the stream bed can actually tell a really important story about how much pollution is affecting that stretch of creek. So there will be very tolerant species, and they will almost always be found, but they are few and far between. Mostly, it's about species that you're not finding that tells the story of how much contamination is in a stream bed. And though the water quality may change, the stream bed tells the more consistent story of what's going on in that particular stretch. So our science team goes out and we do direct research. But in addition, we have a number of community scientists. So they are actually really the lifeblood of Ottawa Riverkeeper, doing so much incredible work. We're a small team, we're 15 staff, and of course with such a big watershed, we can't be everywhere throughout the watershed. And so through the support of volunteers who sign up to become community scientists, then we can have eyes and ears and be taking samples across the whole watershed. So we run multiple different community-based monitoring programs, everything from monitoring chloride for understanding road salt contamination to getting invasive species reports for throughout the watershed, observations of algal blooms, doing photographic evidence of those. And over the years, we've done quite a few different programs. So the work of community scientists really drives our science. In addition, we test for recreational water quality. So this is understanding E. coli levels that are at swim sites and other recreational sites. So this is pretty important for sailing clubs to know about. And we not only do we do some of the testing, but of all of the different entities that test throughout the watershed. So, some beaches are monitored by municipal authorities, some by the NCC, some by the province. We upload all of that data to a single site called Swim Guide so that you can get at your fingertips the latest information on the water quality levels near you. So if you're traveling throughout the watershed and you're looking to know, is it safe to swim, then you don't need to know who the authority is. You can just look up on Swim Guide. In fact, about 350,000 people check out the results that we upload to Swim Guide every year. And so it's a really useful tool to understand what the latest water quality is. Sure.
Do you guys, would you make a recommendation about whether it's advisable to swim in certain areas? And I'm just wondering, if you do, does that tend to vary from the city, I guess, who would report?
Yeah, great question. So we don't actually make a recommendation or advise a decision about whether a site should remain open or closed for swimming. We do the testing or we can kind of advise on their protocols for it. And then we leave the decisions to those authorities. But there are some pretty clear mandates from Health Canada as well as from provincial authorities about what an acceptable level is. And so it's usually about 200 parts per million of E. coli bacteria. And if it's under that threshold, which it often is for the Ottawa River nowadays, then safe to swim. But if a single sample from a site shows 400 or more, then we would advise not to. So we're not actually giving that advisory, but we're going in accordance, doing the testing and going in accordance with what those existing levels are. Now, we're jumping ahead to talk about rec water quality, but I love it, so let's do it. Paris Olympics and the Seine. So they were looking in the EU, the level is actually much higher for acceptable levels. It's several times higher. In fact, it's at 900 parts per million. And that's where the Seine was consistently failing. They could not get their levels under that, despite billions being poured into cleaning up the Seine. And so this was, I have a little slide to show this later, but I just kind of lapped this up. I loved it. And I put an op-ed in the Citizen saying just how we deserve an Olympic medal for how swimmable our river is, because it consistently is under even our more conservative levels. And so I think that's a point that we have so much to be proud of, but I will get to more of that later. So we actually monitor in our science work, we monitor for over 14 different indicators of river health. Not only are we doing our own direct research, not only are we working with the incredible work of community scientists, but we're also taking existing data that has not been understood from a watershed scope. And so there's federal data, there's provincial data in Ontario and Quebec that isn't talking to one another, that needs to be harmonized and understood from a watershed scope. And so our science team is doing that work. We are crunching those numbers and doing that analysis to make sense of it within a watershed. Because you need the data that tells the whole story of a river. You can't have half of the data. And unfortunately, that's kind of how things are being run right now, is that we'll take data from the Ontario side of the river, or we'll take data from the Quebec side of the river. And sometimes our protections happen that way as well, because data can inform decision making. And so the American eel, which has nearly been extirpated in the Ottawa River, its populations are down 99% as an important indicator fish species. And it is endangered in Ontario. So if an eel is swimming through the Ottawa River, it's protected on the Ontario water of the river, but it's not on the Quebec side of the river. Does an eel know when they're swimming in Ontario or Quebec waters? I don't know, maybe they're pretty incredible species, maybe they do. But it shows you about how we are missing the ball on being able to work together to care for this river. And I love seeing that image of the different sailing clubs along the river and seeing that as a community, because it is so clear there that this is a resource, this is a gem that we share, and this is a shared responsibility to care for it. So our work and what we try to instill in our education work is this idea that we protect what we love. And I also firmly believe that we love what we come to know and what we have a relationship with. So in our education work, we know that we can't be the only ones taking data and telling decision makers what to do with it. We need to rally broader support to care for this river. And we have a passion for that. Because we love the river, we want to share what we know about it and encourage others to love it and protect it too. So through our education work, for years we ran a youth water leaders program. So this was engaging youth age 16 to 25. They would get out on the river. In fact, it was a year-round program where 6 months they would be engaged in learning about the river, and then they would do their own projects about the river. Here's a mural that one of the youth water leaders did on Bate Island. So she, in her program, was learning about endangered species of the river and decided to make this mural with her dad as an homage to the endangered species of the river. So it's getting a bit faded now. This was a few years ago, but you'll really only see it if you're exactly on Bate Island or if you're on the river going by. So I think it's a pretty special mural. We also host shoreline cleanups. So this is a way to directly help stop the garbage and waste to enter the river. And I know that a lot of people do that when they're out on the river too, helping clean up what they see either in the water or on shorelines. And this is a really strong engagement tool as well, because some of the concepts we're talking about can't be seen. They're not as tangible or not visible, but being able to actually help pick up trash gets you involved, gets you active, and you start to see the difference that you're making. So in fact, just last week, we launched what we're calling it's a big storage shed, which we're calling the watershed. Yeah. And from there, it's where community groups can loan out our shoreline cleanup materials. So we have buckets, we have the grabbers, we have bags, we have all sorts of stuff. And so it's kind of like a DIY kit of how to host a cleanup. And so that's a new service that we're testing out to offer to community groups because we struggle to keep up with the ones that we're being requested to do. And so we know that that's such an important engagement activity. And then now that we're at River House, I was saying that there's new opportunities there. Well, a new opportunity is that we now get to have baby turtles in my office. So at River House, yes, we have our offices, but the best part is that we now have an education classroom. In fact, we open it up to the public and call it our learning lab. We're building interpretive displays this winter so that you can come there and learn more about the river. And there's a lab where we do our water quality testing. And we've partnered with the Petrie Island Turtle Project because they do a lot of turtle conservation work, and they needed a place to keep their turtle egg incubator. I didn't know what that was right away, but I said, yes, how can we partner? So it's almost just like a little mini fridge, except instead of cooling things, it keeps it at a constant temperature. They have permits to be able to gather the turtle eggs that are laid at Petrie Island. If those eggs were left at Petrie Island, there would be a roughly 5% hatch rate. In an urban environment like Petrie, they are heavily predated upon. Raccoons, skunks, foxes, all sorts of creatures. Also, the fact that most of the parking lots in Petrie Island are sand and gravel, perfect spots for turtles to lay their eggs. And so when the eggs are laid, they're very, very vulnerable. And the way that the mama turtle does it is that she lays and she leaves. She is just fine on her own. Thank you very much. And so for the 6 to 8 weeks that those turtle eggs would be incubating, they are vulnerable to threat. So with a permit, thanks to the Canadian Wildlife Federation, our biologists can go and gather the eggs and then put them into the incubator so that then they have an 80 to 90 to 95% hatch rate. And all 8 species of freshwater turtles in the watershed are at risk. And so being able to give them that help through that most vulnerable stage of their lives makes a big difference to the population. But best of all, the public loves baby turtles. I thought I was the only one. But people come and want to see these baby turtles. These are our busiest days in the learning lab when the turtles have started to hatch. This past year, we were able to incubate 3 different species of turtle eggs. So of painted turtles, of northern map turtles, and also snapping turtles. And we had an 80% hatch rate this year. They were all released back to Petrie Island. And in fact, there were 700 people who helped out to release them as well. So there's educational opportunities for people to develop that relationship all the way along and to learn more about how they can help to protect these species. The third big bucket of what we do is in advocacy. So as I was saying earlier, we don't just gather data for data's sake. We gather it because we know that that important information can help guide our decisions, and that there's inconsistency or a bit of incongruency in how our decision makers are looking after the river. And so when we can pull them together and we can show them what we know from our data, from our science, then we can advocate for better protections. This was World Environment Day a couple of years ago. We had just moved in fresh to River House, and we were able to host the Federal Environment Minister on World Environment Day. And so now, again, with River House, we have a whole new platform from which we can convene. We can bring people together, and we can talk about the issues in a space that is on the water. And I emphasize that piece, on the water, because I think it changes our conversations. When you come to the water, do you notice something change in yourself? Do you notice a bit of like a calmness? Like, I don't know, maybe there's even like changes in our ions, right? Yeah, you've got an exact point. And so I think that influences our conversations too. I think that when we bring decision makers together at the water's edge or directly on the water as we are at River House, that changes the tone. It builds a more constructive conversation, and that's what we really believe we need. Oh, I always think this photo is hilarious, but this photo is of an intervention. So Ottawa Riverkeeper was a formal intervener for a nuclear waste site that is being developed along the Ottawa River. This is a file that we've been very active on at Chalk River since 2016. We sit on official committees and are an official intervener. And so, you know, we've been able to build up a strong reputation over the years. Strong relationships with different elected officials, and just a strong brand so that when we come to speak about issues, we're there in a way that is knowledgeable and we're there in a way that is trusted and respected. And so when we are speaking up about issues like a waste facility for nuclear waste that would be 1 kilometer from the Ottawa River, then this is really important work to do. But we also know that being located in Ottawa with federal politicians close by gives us a different kind of relationship than many other watershed organizations across the country. Plus, there's not that many nonprofits that have such a deep knowledge of nuclear issues in particular. So when Canada was modernizing the nuclear waste decommissioning policy, we were very active with NRCan and the Minister's Office in those proceedings as well. And so there's a number of different ways in which we can be involved, not only to stand up for the Ottawa River and its tributaries, but also to use that platform and the knowledge that we've gained to be able to speak to broader issues, both federally and internationally through our work with the Waterkeeper Alliance. Now, all of this kind of comes together this past year with the release of our first ever comprehensive watershed report card. This was taking 14 different indicators of river health, analyzing them, and spitting out, that makes it sound way too simple, it was really, really hard, but spitting out an understanding of how we're doing as caretakers of this watershed. And there were some hits and there were some misses, unfortunately a lot of misses, but, I thought I was already at the other point. There we go. So one thing that I do want to speak to that we highlighted in the report card was a big win has been through the City of Ottawa, where over the years, combined sewer overflows, so direct flows of untreated sewage into the river, has been a huge problem for the river. I'm sure that's not news to many of you. And that image persists. A lot of people think that it is not safe to swim in the Ottawa River. And unfortunately, it was often the case that there would be regular and large sewage overflows into the river that did make it unsafe for swimming. Those E. coli levels I was talking about earlier would be beyond a reasonable and safe level. And so the graph that you're seeing, or the chart that's here, is showing over the years going back to 2006, the number of combined sewer overflows that were flowing into the Ottawa River just from City of Ottawa. So of course, they're not the only ones who are putting sewage into the river, but they are the most populous city, and so they have a big impact. And so what we see here is the impact over time of them decreasing their CSOs, or combined sewer overflows. Part of this is because they were able to raise some awareness, become more aware of this issue. And we worked long and hard behind the scenes with them to bring attention to this issue and to ask for them to do more on this. So we were asking for real-time monitoring. They need to know right away when a CSO happens, and they need to act on it. We also asked for them to be reporting on the CSOs. So they at first needed only to report to the Minister of the Environment. Now every single time that there is an overflow, even I get an email directly. And we're asking for that public accountability too. And so you'll see that now. There will be news releases whenever there is a significant CSO, because they have to report it. But a huge change that happened, and you can see it's one little dip in the chart. I'll point to it. So that little dip shows when they made a big infrastructure change. They installed a combined sewage storage tunnel. And that was a huge undertaking, but it's made a difference to decrease those combined sewer overflows. And so this is a good win, that now the Ottawa River is significantly more swimmable because City of Ottawa has taken action. And oh my gosh, this is the op-ed that I was talking about earlier. It's the only time I'll ever willingly publish a photo of myself in a swimsuit. But the Ottawa River deserves an Olympic medal for swimmability. I'm happy to go down in history with that being the thing I've said. And so, this is really a point of pride that we have, is just how swimmable our river is. And as I was saying, the E. coli levels need to be able to be less than 200 in order for it to be deemed safe to swim. And in the testing that we're doing and that we're seeing from other results, by and large, it's usually closer to 50 counts. And so that's really impressive. That's really a healthy river in terms of swimmability. It's only testing for one parameter, But still, that's an important parameter when we want to be able to recreate in this river. We want to be able to connect and enjoy with it. I mean, to live, I can't imagine living in a city where you would not be able to enjoy a beautiful, fast-flowing river that is going past you, just like we have here. And so, though there were many times when it was not safe to swim in the Ottawa River, and you still should always check the swim guide, but by and large, it is a very swimmable river now, and that's something to be very proud of. I'll share also about our work on American eels. So I mentioned that earlier. Now, eels are a magnificent fish species, and they should be found in huge numbers here. The main reason that the American eel is not able to migrate into the Ottawa River anymore is because it physically cannot enter. The Carillon Dam, which is a Hydro-Quebec facility at the mouth of the river, physically stops eels from being able to enter. It does not have to be this way because there are inventions called eel ladders that allow for fish passage. This is an eel ladder on the right here, where it's actually a fairly simple technology, and the eels can swim up it. But unfortunately, there is not an eel ladder at Carillon, and despite a few years of us advocating for one, there's no sign that Hydro-Quebec would budge and begin to install one. The irony of it is that other hydropower facilities farther upstream do have eel ladders. Do you remember I spoke about how sometimes the policy can be different? So eels are endangered in Ontario, but not in Quebec. Well, that's because the Ontario facilities that operate hydropower have eel ladders, but the Quebec ones do not. And it's an insufficient solution because they all need to have eel ladders in order for that species to be able to make their way. So this is an example of how we are not yet working together to care for the river. And unfortunately, it's biodiversity, it's the other creatures that are suffering for that. Eels alone used to make up 50% of the biomass in the river. So for them to be down to 1% of their historical numbers is devastating. It is a major change to the ecology of the river. And as we care about the river, as we try to protect what we love, it's not only for our drinking water. It's not only for our human benefit. We have responsibilities as stewards. Our actions impact all of the other creatures. And so this is an example of how we can do better. We can use our voices, we can take action, and we can demand from our decision makers that they need to do better as well. The last piece I'll share is about road salt, because it's a hot topic in these cold times. This week is our third annual Road Salt Reduction Week. And this points to another way that our science work is informing advocacy and education as well. So community scientists, I think these are like some of our most amazing community scientists because they're going out year-round, but especially through some very stormy winter weather, and gathering samples from urban creeks and streams to be able to understand the chloride levels. And chloride is primarily entering creeks and streams because of the road salt that we apply. When I say we, this is a complicated one. It's us as property owners, it's businesses, but it's some of the big players too, like municipalities, the NCC, the province. And so when we're putting that road salt down, it's very effective to melt ice, or it can be in the right conditions. But we've come to depend on road salt for much more than being a de-icer. we've come to expect that road salt actually helps us not slip and fall. So it provides traction or grip, and we think that's what's going to help us through the winter. But I think Canadians, we've got to take this as a point of pride that we know how to handle winter weather. We know what tool to use at the right time. And we've kind of lost track of what salt is for. And so the impact is that we are rendering our urban creeks and streams toxic to aquatic organisms because of our overuse or over-reliance on road salt. So in the chloride samples that we're testing, here you can see that in the average for over the 5 years in which we've been monitoring, that there's only 2 creeks that are within the safe levels on average. And unfortunately, some of the ones in here are very, very high. So the yellow band shows chronic toxicity. This means pretty much for long periods of time that it will be harmful to aquatic organisms. And then there's acute toxicity, where it'll be a level that spikes to a point that it can be toxic for a short period. And what happens is it affects the respiratory and reproductive abilities of some of the most vulnerable species in our creeks and streams. So salamanders, dragonflies, some fish larvae. And we do testing year round because it can persist. The chloride actually embeds in the creek bed, and it can even show toxic levels in August, far from the road salt season. And so we've been doing this monitoring for 5 winters now to understand this issue better. And unfortunately, the results are really alarming. So we're using this data. We've just published this week our 5-year report, and we're using this data to raise awareness about the issue. We're in talks with City of Ottawa, with the Ville de Gatineau. In fact, they're doing a new pilot to try to address this problem this year. We're also talking with the NCC, and we're trying to, and Ecology Ottawa is one of our partners on this, talking with OC Transpo, because many of these do not even have a road salt management plan, let alone to have one that is updated and applied consistently. So with it being Road Salt Reduction Week, I know everybody knows that already, we're all celebrating, but we're trying a bit of a new thing this year, where we're asking individuals and businesses to sign on to a pledge. And we're working with those bigger authorities to hold them to account and ask for more from them. But we also know that when we get individual and that broader public support signing on, that can help influence them as well. And so this week we're inviting people to sign on to our Road Salt Reduction Pledge. We'll come up with a snappier name at some point. So with all of this combined, what can you do? Because I know that you care about the river, but how can you care for the river? One thing you can do is submit your reports. Become a community scientist. You can use our pollution hotline if you see something fishy in the river. Or you can submit observations, like about when ice is forming on or off river. In fact, we have some handy guides that are on our website to show you what you should be looking for and where to report them. But also in the summertime around algal blooms, or year-round with invasive species. Our pollution hotline is a 1-800 number, but also there's a form on our website. And I said it's if you see something fishy. Unfortunately, some of the most concerning ones are when there are fish kills. You may remember a mass fish kill that happened in the Ottawa River in 2019. Ottawa Riverkeeper was first out on the boat to be able to observe that fish kill. And we were talking with authorities on both sides of the river to make sure that they were working on this. Another piece that you can do is to organize or participate in shoreline cleanups. It is a very tangible way to help out. You see that difference, and you can engage others in it as well. Even if it's just to chat with a passerby, like, oh, what are you doing? And it really demonstrates those small actions can add up to a bigger impact. Another piece you can do is check water quality on the swim guide. It's an app, or you can just go on the website. Oh, I know you're all excited to sign the road salt pledge now. So there you go, ottawariverkeeper.ca/salt. There's also a boat wash pledge, which we haven't been promoting recently, but it does provide good information about boat washing. And we have more information on our website about that. As well, we have a guide to sustainable boating. And you can also sign up for our newsletter because there really is a lot of helpful information in there, and it's great then to be able to spread what you learn. A last thing, I know you're working on the legacy fund, so you do you. But one option is also to help support, become a supporter of Ottawa Riverkeeper. We are all benefiting from what the river gives us. It can be a way to be able to give back. So as I mentioned, we are working with our new classroom, our new lab, our new convening space on the river. And this brings whole new opportunities well beyond baby turtles of what we can do to protect the river. And so we're making this happen through the Big River Give. The tagline here is that the river gives us so much. This is how we give back. And so I invite you to consider making a donation to Ottawa Riverkeeper. It is very rewarding. So thank you, merci miigwech. It's such a pleasure to chat with you and share more about our work this evening. On behalf of my whole team, it really is a joy to share this with you.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you so much, Laura. And we do have the mic, and I hope we have maybe a few questions from the floor before we're done. We have some time. Please.
I was mentioning to you earlier that ever since your colleague was here a couple of years ago, I started using coffee grounds on my driveway instead of salt. This ice melter, this blue ice melter, is it the same amount of chloride? Is that no difference?
So the most common road salt configuration is sodium chloride, but the key piece for impacting aquatic ecosystems is the chloride part of it. And so there are alternatives that are marketed as alternatives, but if you're looking at what's actually included, if you're seeing chloride, that's a tell. That means that there is something that is going to be harming the ecosystem when it enters the water. So the sodium will mostly dissolve and be washed away, but the chloride embeds itself and is what's harmful to aquatic organisms. There are different tools that you can include in your toolbox. So coffee grounds or gravel or sand can help with traction. I'm not going to diss traction. Traction's very important. I feel safer when I know there's something that I can grip. But if salt is applied thick enough for traction, it's not doing its job as a de-icer. It's being used for traction. And so we're adding a toxic substance for something that doesn't require it. So that's where we encourage people to expand their toolkit, embrace being a true Canadian and use all the different tools, a shovel, and using something for traction, and using salt only when it's useful, which means no colder than -7 degrees. Most of the chloride products they become less effective quickly when it's colder than -7. And think about our Ottawa winter. Most of the time it's colder than -7. So salt is rarely the tool that we need, but unfortunately we've got into a mindset where it's the first we grab. So first think, what are the other tools that I could be using right now? And we've got on that link with the pledge, we've got lots of other tips about road salt. We've got a road salt quiz. You can test your knowledge. It's so fun.
This is more curiosity than anything, but I have been watching a lot of things about microplastics in the water, and I just wondered what our water has in terms of these little bits of tiny little bits of plastic that we're all ingesting.
Yeah, there's more and more public awareness coming about with microplastics, which is fantastic, but it's a scary and overwhelming issue because the studies are showing that microplastics are showing up in our blood. And, that's fairly pervasive in our brains, exactly. In 2018, I think it was, Ottawa Riverkeeper did the largest community science study of microplastics in freshwater in the world. And so kudos to those community scientists who helped out then. They collected samples not only from water, but also from the sediment. And then it was in partnership with researchers, Dr. Jesse Vermeer from Carleton University, where they did the testing to find out were there microplastics. And that was several years ago now. Every single sample showed the presence of microplastics from the Ottawa River, both the water and the sediment. And roughly 70% of the microplastics found were from textiles. So we tend to think about plastics being the hard plastics or the food plastics that we're using, but actually from textiles is a major concern. And it doesn't usually get filtered out in the laundry. And even when it does, sometimes municipalities will reapply that as sludge to agricultural fields. And so we're ending up with not only are those textiles contributing microplastics directly into our waterways, but they're even sometimes being circulated back in. And so, unfortunately, the answer is yes, we have found presence of microplastics consistently, and there's a lot of work that would need to be done in order to address that problem.
Any final questions for Laura? Those of us that are involved in public affairs, I know we know of your advocacy, and it's neat to check out the website. And being in Ottawa is such a benefit as well. I'm just curious, is there an economic argument for the city and those that purchase the salt to say, here's a cheaper alternative? Because some governments, science works, and in some governments, and at certain times, an economic argument is more pervasive. I'm just curious if there is actually a cheaper solution that would be as effective.
I mean, salt is a huge budget item for the city, for municipalities in general. And Ottawa in particular has a really large surface area as a municipality. And so there's a lot of ground that, literally ground they need to cover in their salt applications. It's not yet confirmed, but it's looking very promising that we'll be doing a webinar soon with City of Ottawa staff to speak about their work of the steps that they're taking to try to address this. At a minimum, they've been very forthcoming to share their work with us. And we're eager to share that with the public because there are solutions, and it really just takes the will to implement them. And they know that it's an issue to reduce that budget as well. And so, yes, there's a lot of opportunities and alternatives out there, even ways to, mix in so that you're not just using salt when you're applying it. You can have a different makeup. Another piece of it is the corrosion that happens to infrastructure. So with the Alexandra Bridge needing to be replaced, one of the reasons why that they have publicly stated is damage from road salt. So the salt will actually corrode infrastructure. And you may remember in the news last year that both Calgary and Montreal suffered major water main breaks. Road salt was also cited as a major contributor to that infrastructure breaking down. So we're salting. I don't know why. It may be a fear of that legal liability. Certainly, when the federal government was classifying road salt as a toxin, it was demoted in class with heavy lobbying from municipalities. They do not want the liability when there are slip and falls. And so the result is that, yes, it's expensive to apply. They're applying it kind of free for all. And then there's the damage that happens to the infrastructure that doesn't really show up in the same way on their budgets. So, there's many arguments to why it's important to reduce the salt use, but I recognize it's also complex for those authorities to make the decision to move away from salt. And we're not actually advocating no salt. The science of how it melts ice is fascinating. It's a really good de-icer. It's just about proper use, yeah.
Sorry, it's so interesting. And you wonder the different sites, what are the actual practices that those applying it are using as their standards? Anyways, Laura, thank you so much. This is a bit of a token of our appreciation. And we really also just want to extend a big hug. And, that red light's still going off, and you're just doing the work of your dad still. So thank you so much. And
thank you all so much.